I've been lied to, as I've learned from people today. I've been lied to. My lie's been a lie. My whole education system is a sham. It's just those lying Polish people, those lying, ungrateful Polish people, ungrateful to the Soviet Union that saved them in 1939. And what can I say? I just want to learn. I just want to educate myself on the topic of the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, which apparently, as the title suggests, there was never a Hitler-Stalin pact. As our teacher, our professor today is going to be Hakim, a prominent YouTuber with 270,000 subscribers. So he probably knows what he's talking about. And we're just going to learn. We're just going to educate ourselves on what actually happened. Apparently, this is heavily documented. There's tons of evidence going to be presented, and we're just going to watch it. Take it away, Professor Hakim. Stalin tried to prevent World War II. Michael Jabara Carly, which I can already tell you what this is all about. This is probably about the whole, the USSR wanted to have a pact with the West against Germany, but the stubborn and silly Poland did not want the USSR Red Army to have free access to its territory, which was so unreasonable, especially after the NKWD Polish operation within the Soviet borders, where over 100,000 Polish people were killed. But that's not important. That is irrelevant.
Hello. We are.
Why would Poland not want Soviet troops to just be able to enter Polish territory after the Polish-Soviet War? I will. Yeah, I will. This one, I just decided that I had to. I decided that I had to watch this to educate myself. As it seems like my whole life was a lie. I've been lied to by everybody.
We hear a lot about a supposed Hitler-Stalin pact, and much
supposed Stalin Hitler pact. I gotta tell you, this was some deep conspiracy. The conspiracy was so deep that even Stalin naively believed it, that there was some Hitler-Stalin pact. The lie was so throw out, the lie worked so well that even Stalin believed it. Look at that.
Noise is made trying to link, by extension, two wildly differing ideologies and nations together through some forced horseshoe theory nonsense.
By the way, the notion that Nazi Germany and the USSR had a pact, worked together, has nothing to do with any horseshoe theory. That is a ridiculous statement. I do not know who puts this forward, this notion that Nazi Germany and the USSR were brought together through horseshoe theory, that they were actually ideologically aligned. But the reality is they aligned themselves because, one, both Germany and the USSR after World War I basically became outcasts in the West. They became shunned, which is why they looked towards each other for cooperation. It was very simple. Like it started within Weimar Germany, Those countries just looked for each other for cooperation. Pretty simple stuff. And also, the one ideological glue, you could say, that brought these two countries together was the opinion, the notion, the idea that Poland was an artificial country that should not exist, and that it sort of stole away Germany's as well as USSR's / Russia's territory to be created. That it should just be erased from the map. Those two countries heavily agreed on that point. Like, the reason why those countries entered the pact was purely pragmatic. It was just called politics. There was no horseshoe theory involved. So this whole shtick about this is just, I'm not sure who or what it is responding to even. There were many reasons for the pact. There were many reasons for the alliance, you could even say, but this was not part of it.
If you're unaware, the horseshoe theory claims that the far left and the far right, rather than being at opposite and opposing ends of a linear political continuum, are instead incredibly similar. This is the sort of brain-dead take you expect from so-called liberals who consider themselves unlike.
So no, there's no merit to this. Horseshoe theory has nothing to do why Ribbentrop Molotov happened. Also, this ignores the idea of irredentism. You don't need to be ideologically similar and still can follow an irredentism. Yeah, like, you don't have to be ideologically similar. You just have to have similar, like, political things that you can agree on. Like, for example, the idea that Poland should not exist. Even if the parties do not agree with each other ideologically, they can unite on, for example, not allowing Poland to exist. And they can have a pact based on that. And they can write up a secret protocol that would divide up Poland between them. What do you know? World War I peace treaties had been very problematic for too many states that emerged after World War I.
Enlightened when doing their both sides are bad shtick.
So no, this is just a waste of time, this whole thing about the horseshoe theory.
Historically, the so-called liberal center has always immediately sided with the far right when it came down to it, while the far left was the only one to have any real form of successful and organic resistance.
Successful and organic resistance, huh? Then how come, and this is a pretty interesting thing to analyze, how come the far left at the end of the day, a lot of the far left, a lot of socialists, communists, did align with the Polish state in the Soviet-Polish War? How did that happen? Can Hakim make a separate video on that, explaining that to me, so that I can learn? All I have is silly books such as State or Revolution, which tackled the problem of whether or not after World War I, Poland should have became a nation state like it did, or should it have went the road of just doing a revolution and not forming a state at all.
Resistance, but that's not why I'm here today. Let's discuss the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact.
Okay.
Note, the USSR and the Stalin era specifically was an incredibly nuanced episode of history. There are no great men, history is made by people and material conditions.
Sorry,
episode of history. Note, the USSR and the Stalin era specifically was an incredibly nuanced episode of history.
I'm sorry. That is a very, very sneaky way, very dishonest way to just brush away the fact that the USSR under Stalin basically became a dictatorship. I'm sorry. You could say that about Nazi Germany. You could unironically, if you were a Nazi apologist, you could say Germany under Hitler was a very nuanced time. There are no great men. things are just made by circumstances are true, but guess what? Material conditions can also bring about dictatorships. That happens. Dictatorships happen. Just because there are no great men, it doesn't mean that dictators do not exist in the world. That dictators are like this fake concept that does not exist.
There are no great men. History is made by people and material conditions. Actions aren't taken in a vacuum, but instead are affected by real deficits and changes as they occur.
That's great, but you can say that about anything. You can say that to excuse anything. Nazi Germany didn't just arise in a vacuum. It was created in the circumstances of post-World War War, of the Versailles Treaty, of how unfairly Germany was treated. Material conditions, quite literally.
Really does something.
It was a very nuanced situation, you see.
In history happened because someone is crazy, whatever that means. Much more commonly, we're simply missing or refusing to investigate the context.
There you go. You could say it about Nazi Germany. Oh, you say that Hitler was just crazy, but you know, you're just failing to look into the context. Those are empty statements that can be applied to any sort of political system, any sort of to any country, really. You could do that with any country you want, from Nazi Germany to North Korea to China to the US to Poland. You could do this with any country. This is a thought-terminating cliche, basically. You're just missing the context. So far, we're just hearing a lot of empty platitudes, but, you know, maybe the video will sort of
You don't have to like the USSR to be fair to the conditions it found itself in, nor do you need to agree with the actions taken just because you can...
Exactly. Stalin was simply forced to purge all of the top brass of the military. He had no other choice. Stalin simply had no choice to kill all of the generals. In fact, Stalin had no choice but to keep live ammunition away from the Red Army soldiers. You know? He had no choice. Stalin just had no choice but to keep the live ammunition. And also he had no choice but to keep the planes not fueled. Because you see, the context is that the army could have overthrown him at any moment. So he had to do these moves because otherwise, you know.
Understand why a certain action was taken. Broaden your mind a little, don't insult your intelligence, and be better than those that lap up the laziest pop history propaganda.
Well, you know what? Don't prime the audience. Just give us the context. Like, this sort of priming the audience is just a waste of time. This addendum should not be called Don't Be Stupid. It should be called Waste of Time, filler.
Let's get started.
Pad out the video to the 18 minutes, 17 seconds mark.
A frequent trope we hear is this. The 1939 Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact was a military alliance between the USSR and Nazi Germany. This framing usually follows attempts of paralleling...
A common trope. Also, nobody says that. Nobody says that if you're going to be technical, nobody says that nobody says that Ribbentrop-Molotov was a military alliance between USSR and Nazi Germany. What people do say, which is correct, there was a pact of non-aggression between Nazi Germany and the USSR, which contained a secret protocol about dividing up Poland. That is what it was. Thank you. Nobody says there was a military alliance between the USSR and Nazi Germany. I don't know where you took this trope from, but in no historical text, no history book, no text on the subject will you see a historian say that the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact was a military alliance between the USSR and Nazi Germany. It was a non-aggression pact with a secret protocol attached to it. There you go. I've solved your conundrum. Well, to me it is a waste of time because I'm not sold. I've not been sold to the premise. I'm sorry. I'm not buying what Hakim is selling. Unfortunately, many people do. 33,000, in fact.
The USSR and Nazi Germany, and by extension, socialism and
So if you're gonna set up the context, at least represent the case correctly, because nobody actually says that it was a military alliance. It is always described as a pact of non-aggression with an added secret protocol. It is a manipulative and conscious choice. Oh, I know that, but I'm still going to criticize it, and the best way to criticize it from my perspective is to call it a waste of time. A filler. It is better though to fight a straw man though, no? I mean, it is easier.
fascism in an ideological attempt at painting a certain strand of liberalism as a part and
I mean, no, that's not actually true. I know Western left-leaning people that don't do that at all. I know people I would consider left-leaning that don't accept this sort of thing. In fact, I've been informed of this thing from people that I consider Western left-leaning people, so, you know. I've been informed of this existing by Western left-leaning people.
somehow more legitimate to the concepts of integrity.
This is irrelevant. Liberalism is morally superior. This is irrelevant. I'm sorry, this is irrelevant to the question of Ribbentrop-Molotov from my perspective.
Quote unquote, being on the right side of history, etc. Then social.
President Sunday made quite a few videos on Hakim years ago, I believe, even before he went left-wing. President Sunday made a video like 2 years ago on Hakim about the Uyghur genocide, about the genocide happening in China. Because apparently Hakim, of course, denies that's a thing as well, which does not surprise me at this point. So that's a thing. It's a thing that President Sunday has made a video about. Oh, today.
Socialism. Note that this rarely is used against fascism and is intended solely to paint socialism in a bad light. I wonder why. Let's give some general background information. Soviet Russia and...
So this is just Soviet Russia. So it's not the USSR anymore. Now it's just Soviet Russia. How interesting, how interchangeably you use these terms. Well, according to President Sunday, is that the that it's not a thing. That's Hakim's take. Denying it.
And the subsequent USSR, having only fairly recently won a short but brutal civil war with Tsar's forces and invasions by many foreign powers, oriented foreign policy towards Germany in the mid-1920s.
Can you elaborate on that, please?
Two lesser known by many foreign powers, fairly recently won a short but brutal civil war with Tsar's forces and invasions by many foreign powers.
Invasions by many foreign powers. Can you elaborate on that? I know that Western powers did back the White Army and that's a whole thing, but can you please elaborate? Because you're leaving a lot of vague things out of this whole story. Right off the bat. Even though you're supposed to be giving us context, and the devil lies in the details, so I would like to hear those details from your mouth.
Oriented foreign policy towards Germany in the mid-1920s. Two lesser-known treaties, the Treaty of Locarno and the Treaty of Special Relations with Berlin, helped shape that Soviet foreign policy. The Treaty of Locarno, between the main European belligerents of World War I, sought to establish a lasting peace, which Soviet Russia would generally benefit from, since the country was so utterly devastated by the Great War and the Civil War following the October Revolution. However, the USSR viewed the treaty with suspicion since it appeared that Germany was joining an anti-Soviet bloc. The other treaty, that of Special Relations.
Interesting, considering that Germany was absolutely shunned after World War I as a country. So it wasn't about to be joining any blocs anytime soon. It wasn't about to be allowed into any blocs. In fact, yeah. Are we forgetting how Germany was treated after World War I? It's gonna be just brushed aside. We're gonna pretend that Germany after World War I was treated as an equal partner among Western countries in some bloc. Because that was absolutely not the case. Not as long as France had any say in it anyway.
Relations with Berlin was meant to assuage these fears by being a 5-year treaty with Weimar Germany in which they would be neutral in the event that either country was attacked by a third party. Unfortunately, the optimism for long-term peace wouldn't last long. In the late 1920s, the Nazis began their rise to power, which infamously culminated in the appointment of Hitler as the Chancellor of Germany in 1933. The rise of the Nazis caused the USSR to refocus its foreign policy efforts to combat this threat. The policy, which came to be known as collective security, attempted to strengthen relationships with France and Britain in an attempt to isolate Germany. Meanwhile, the fear of Western leaders' imaginations and the interests they served led them to irrationally fear the spread of communism and were reluctant to
irrationally spread the fear of communism. I wonder why. Can it have anything to do with the Soviet Union actually invading countries trying to spread communism through war? Like the Polish-Soviet War. Could it have anything to do with that? I wonder. I wonder if it had anything to do with that. With the fact that the Soviet march westward was just stopped on Poland. I wonder. It's a very curious question to contemplate, actually.
enter into diplomatic relations
Those paranoid people.
with the USSR lest they catch the communist virus. Instead, the West decided that appeasing the Nazis would be a better strategy, and we all know how that turned out. As a result of this reluctance on the part of the West, the USSR was forced to fend for its security alone. Back to the video in just a second, let's hear from Keeps. Male pattern baldness is a genetic condition that affects
Oh my god, no. Are you joking? You're really going to do this in the middle of a video like this? To be fair with Hakim, there was massive anti-communism in many countries and not just the fear of Soviet Union. True, but it is not what Hakim is describing here. What Hakim is basically trying to do is trying to take the Red Scare from the United States and transplant it into the realities of the 20s in Europe. And while the whole saying of the shadow of communism is upon us, etc., was a thing definitely in Europe, it was not exactly the thing that is being presented here. It was not as simple as that. Yeah, but we also have to acknowledge that while there was fear of communism, there was also a fear of the Soviet Union that was not unfounded, considering how events unfolded in the 20s, exactly in the 20s. And that there were communist movements that were not exactly aligned with the Soviet Union as well, that were actually communist and not fake communist, at least in Poland. You have to separate the two, and only you can separate to acknowledge that they were silencing communism. I mean, there was. I mean, it sort of will vary from country to country. That's also a whole other thing, right? It's the same thing as not all communism slash, like, not all socialist or even communist thought was Marxist. There were many other schools that were sort of, with time, were forgotten. But at the time, there were actually quite a lot, especially prior to World War One, maybe probably post World War One. There were many different schools of thought when it came to socialism and communism, for that matter. Even though Marxism sort of became the dominant one in the popular consciousness and overall, there were many different things. That is true, although it was even in those countries it was a bit different because the Red Scare was very firmly implanted in the Cold War. So it had its very, very specific nature, which did not translate one to one to the fear and persecution of communists in various countries in Europe. Well, there was no Cold War in the 20s. Not yet. You know? Sure. But I still think the mechanisms were a bit different there. Okay,
Now,
no boldness. Alone. I wonder why. I wonder what left the Soviet Union alone. Alone, alone, alone.
now let's get to the background of the Pact. The treaty of non-aggression between Germany and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, more commonly
Sorry?
known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, so between Germany and the Union of Soviet. Now let's get to the background of the Pact. The Treaty of Non-Aggression between Germany and the Union of Soviet Socialist.
I'm sorry, it is very commonly known as a Treaty of Non-Aggression. I don't like how this weird subtle dishonesty of saying that nobody knows this as the Treaty of Non-Aggression. Yeah, I just stopped. Are you behind? Are you behind on this stream? The chat does not have a delay anymore, so maybe you're a bit behind. I'm having a pretty good weekend, sort of. No, they were with Weimar Germany. They were with Weimar Germany, and Hakim framed them as the Soviet Union fearing that Germany might join an anti-communist bloc. He sort of didn't hide it. He did say that it was with Weimar Germany. He did say that. But the way he framed that was that the USSR was afraid that Germany would join an anti-communist bloc, which in reality, after World War One, Germany was shunned by Western countries. You know? So keep in mind, Germany was not in a position to be joining any blocs anytime soon because it was shunned. Was shunned by other countries, was isolated by other countries. And that was the real actual reason why Germany and the Soviet Union made this approach to one another, Weimar Republic, because both of these countries were pretty isolated. So they found countries that would not shun them. They found each other in this strange circumstance and started cooperating. That is what happened. Not just the USSR fearing that Germany would suddenly join an anti-communist bloc. Like Hakim really seems to be forgetting just how the whole Versailles Treaty treated Germany. What the demands of the treaty were, what the sort of conditions when it came to Germany, the reparations, not having an army, etc., etc.
Republics, more commonly known as the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, so named for the signatories of each government, the foreign minister of Nazi Germany at the time, Joachim von Ribbentrop, and Soviet foreign minister Vyacheslav Molotov.
Oh, very conveniently, by the way, omitting the fact that the Jewish prime minister, that the Jewish foreign sort of...
The agreement was simple. If one at the time, Joachim von Ribbentrop Pact, so named for the signatories of each government, the foreign minister of Nazi Germany.
Yeah, very conveniently omitting the fact that the foreign minister of the Soviet Union was Jewish was dismissed because that would make relations between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union more smooth.
At the time, Joachim von Ribbentrop,
Jewish Minister of Foreign Affairs, was replaced by Molotov.
And Soviet foreign minister Vyacheslav Molotov. The agreement was simple if one ignores the secret provisions.
So, yeah.
It straightforwardly lays out a 10 to 15 year period of mutual neutrality in which neither country would commit aggression against the other, support or provide aid to a third party committing aggression against the other, among stipulations regarding peaceful solutions to disagreements between the respective countries. However, there are 4 so-called secret provisions and
so-called secret provisions. Is this person saying that the secret protocol was fake? Because I've heard Hakim will say in this video that the secret protocol was fake.
Famous partitioning of Poland is...
Oh. Evil communists own half of Poland. Super secret article. I mean, it was secret. Russia itself acknowledges the existence of the secret protocol.
Isn't among them. That is part of the mythos surrounding the agreement and serves the purpose of demonizing the USSR as...
Oh, it's not part of the secret protocol.
As well as deflecting blame from the Allied West. Those surrounding the provisions
sorry,
and the famous partitioning of Poland isn't among them. However, there are 4 so-called secret provisions.
So-called secret provisions.
And the famous partitioning of Poland.
I found a nice quote for this occasion, and I doubt Hakim will ever respond to this, but I doubt Hakim will ever grace me with his response, but Let me see. In October 1992, the chairman of the Russian Archives Committee, Professor Rudolf Pichoya, confirmed the fact that Russians original of secret documents supplementing the Soviet-German agreements of August and September 1939 had been found in the so-called Kremlin archives. Among them were the secret protocol and explanatory notes to it. In February 1995, the original of the secret protocol was shown in Moscow at an exhibition of unique archival materials from 1939 to 1945. So, is Russia lying about the existence of the secret protocols now? Is Russia in on the Western propaganda about the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact? What's happening? A super secret article that Russia is apparently lying about.
Isn't among them. That is part of the mythos surrounding the agreement and serves the purpose of demonizing the USSR, as well as deflecting blame from the Allied Western powers' appeasement of Hitler and the Nazis.
That is irrelevant. Appeasement is irrelevant to the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. You can criticize the appeasement while also acknowledging that the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact was a pretty bad thing. Those things are irrelevant.
The article that is...
Oh! Nazi Germany and the USSR had a pact with a secret protocol, which did include the division of Poland, by the way, and the division of Europe into spheres of influence. It didn't just specify actually the division of Poland. It also specified a division of spheres of influence between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. But, you know,
misconstrued as Stalin working with Hitler to split Poland in half territorially for the same expansionist ends, actually states something quite different and reveals the true Nazi intentions, which we'll discuss in the next section. So,
oh yeah.
Suffice to say, it takes quite the quirky reading of the article to come to a conclusion as outlandish as Stalin conspiring with Hitler to split Poland. It takes an
Let's hear it.
equal amount of audacity to repeat this nonsense as historical fact, but that's a conversation for...
Oh yeah, all those lying historians don't have the wisdom of Hakim. All those Polish historian hacks.
another time. Alright, let's get into more detail. We'll start by recalling that the USSR actively pursued overt military alliances with Britain and France in a policy known as collective security. One such offer, made just 2 days before the war began, had the USSR sending 1 million troops, artillery, and airborne forces to help stop Hitler if they agreed to the pact. Such a pact would have drastically altered the course of history. Unfortunately, both Britain and France declined the offer, forcing the USSR to operate unilaterally without Allied support.
Interesting. Why didn't the USSR seek an alliance with Poland in case it was attacked? Why didn't the USSR propose to Poland that it could supply it with shells, help, etc.? That is an interesting... If the USSR had...
With the collective
let's see, 2
forcing
days
the
before the war...
altered the course of history. Unfortunately,
hold on.
Had the USSR in a policy... Start by recalling that the USSR actively pursued... Alright, let's get into more detail. Britain and France in a policy known as collective security. One such offer, made just 2 days before the war began, had the USSR sending 1 million troops.
1 million troops. Okay, so why didn't the USSR propose to send 1 million troops?
Artillery and airborne forces to help stop...
Artillery and airborne troops to help Poland should it be attacked by Nazi Germany? That would have been achievable from what you're saying, since apparently the USSR had 1 million troops at the ready. So why did that not happen? What happened? I thought the USSR wanted security. So why did then the USSR seek out a treaty with the Nazis instead of with Poland? That is a good question, isn't it?
Hitler if they agreed to the pact. Such a pact would have drastically altered the course of history. Unfortunately, both Britain and France declined the offer, forcing the USSR to operate unilaterally.
Well, I guess Poland was just not an agent in this whole thing, was it? It was just between the USSR, Britain, and France. Poland was not even a factor, I guess.
Without Allied support. With the collective security policy not bearing fruit, the USSR decided the next best course of action was some kind of treaty with Germany that would delay the war machine the Soviets knew were coming for them. So,
why would the Soviets be afraid of the German war machine if they had 1 million troops and artillery and an air force at the ready? Why would they even be afraid of that? How many troops did Germany have when it did the Fall Weiss operation? How many troops during Fall Weiss? Did Germany have? $2.7 million military personnel. The question remains, how many of these soldiers were thrown at the front? How many soldiers did Poland have? Poland have 700,000.
Soviets understood that the West's appeasement policy that had resulted in the annexation of Austria and Czechoslovakia was a failure and prelude to an expansionist war by Germany, and that Poland was in Germany's crosshairs next. The Soviets sought to buy as much time to prepare and therefore was left with the
If it was so obvious that there would be an invasion on the USSR by Nazi Germany, then why did Stalin purge the generals and the entire of the higher military command of his Red Army? I guess that is a question that I posed to Hakim. What was the point of the purges in the army if Stalin was so desperate to buy time to prepare for war? I would think that a purge in the army would be pretty counterproductive to preparing for war, no? When did the purges happen again? About 1937. That's interesting.
An enviable position of having to sign a non-aggression treaty with Germany in order to provide for the security of the USSR and her citizens. All this is also forgetting that the USSR was the last
he does.
country to sign.
That is like the common thing that I often hear from people like this. The USSR didn't actually want to do this. The USSR had no choice. It wanted to buy time, and actually it wanted peace. It wanted a treaty with France and Great Britain, ignoring the fact that the treaty involved Russian troops stationing in Poland, having free reign to just enter Poland, which is very interesting. That has been completely omitted in this video. And that the USSR was simply buying time. It was simply buying time because, you know, the fact is that you know, the USSR purged its military in preparation for war with Nazi Germany, apparently.
sign a non-aggression pact after Poland and France and Belgium, the Baltic countries, amongst others. That's always never mentioned. I wonder why. If you Poland and France and
speaking of things that are never mentioned, I'm gonna mention something in a second.
Belgium was the last country to sign a non-aggression pact after Poland and France and Belgium, the Baltic countries, amongst others.
Do you know what's even more interesting? What's even more interesting that Poland at the time had a little bit of a foreign affairs policy called equal distance, which meant that as Poland signed a non-aggression treaty with Nazi Germany, it signed an identical treaty with the Soviet Union because, again, Poland had a policy of equal distance from both East and the West. So that meant that if a treaty or a pact was made with one side, a similar or same treaty had to be made with the other side in order to keep this equal distance. It's really interesting, speaking of not mentioning things, that this has not been mentioned here. That Poland actually had a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, which had been broken when the USSR entered Poland in 1939. How interesting. What an interesting thing to omit.
That's always never mentioned. I wonder why. If you think
Yeah, I do wonder why this is not mentioned in this video. Yeah, it's a bit of an oopsie to omit, isn't it? The whole equal distance thing.
think this explanation sounds conspiratorial or is call me propaganda, then consider that this explanation was common as early as 1943 when in Time magazine, former U.S. ambassador to the USSR, Joseph Davies, was interviewed about various topics regarding the USSR. In his response to the fifth question about the USSR's opaque foreign policy, he said, in part, and I quote, "When they, the Soviets, lost faith in both the will and the capacity of the Western democracies to join them realistically to stop Hitler, they still tried to maintain their security and their peace by entering into a non-aggression pact with Hitler in 1939. This was not a pact for mutual offensive against Germany's enemies. In that particular, it provided only that neither would attack the other. They gained precious time, which they feverishly employed to protect their security against the inevitable Nazi attack."
Yeah, again, that is why the Purge and the Red Army in the area of 1938, that was in this feverish attempt to prepare for war with Nazi Germany. And again, interestingly enough, when it came to regional security, Poland is actually just ignored and taken out of the picture. Interesting.
Attack. This isn't the only mention of this explanation in the same issue of Time. Calling the USSR, and I quote, realistic, it backs up the claim with the following. She, the USSR, had been the greatest advocate of collective security, but when she saw that the democracies would not support that policy, she turned completely around and gained time to prepare herself by signing a pact with Hitler. The third mention
After having crippled its own military, mind you.
is brought up in a larger context of other treaties and agreements the USSR had entered into prior, including their acceptance.
Funny, that's not mentioned at all in this video. That in this, basically in this time frame, the Soviet Union had effectively crippled its military through purges.
Into the League of Nations, and I quote, under the aegis of then Foreign Commissar Litvinov, the USSR tried to establish.
Oh, interesting. Foreign Commissar Litvinov is mentioned. I wonder what happened to him. What happened to Foreign Minister Litvinov? Can you explain it to us in this video? Why did he go and why did Molotov replace him? Could it have something to do with Litvinov being Jewish and Nazi Germany not being fond of Jewish people?
Establish collective security as a method of thwarting the rising tide of fascism, but the League of Nations collapsed and was followed by appeasement in Munich, the Soviet-Nazi non-aggression pact in 1939, and the entrance of the Reds into the war when Hitler invaded them on June 22nd, 1939.
Oh, the Soviet Union only entered into the war in 1941. The Soviet Union did not enter the war at all in 1939, huh? It did nothing. It just passively did nothing. Okay, that absolutely. Is Hakim going to do a separate video about how cutting was never a thing? Is that a video that I can expect? Denial of cutting happening.
1941. By now, it should be crystal clear that the narrative that resulted from Cold War distortion is in blatant contravention of the facts.
Ah, yes. The famous Cold War Western country of Poland. The narrative of the famous Western Bloc country of Poland. Excellent.
The fact the USSR signed with Germany wasn't a military
Let's
alliance.
keep in mind, this is history of Poland. And I don't know, I might be silly, but as far as I remember, Poland is not exactly a Western Bloc country.
It was a means of buying time to prepare for the easily anticipated invasion.
If it was such an easily anticipated invasion, then again, why did the USSR cripple its own military? Why did the Soviet Union keep live ammunition from soldiers? Why did the Soviet Union always keep its planes without fuel? Which resulted in the Soviet Union losing 2,000 planes within the first 2 days of the Operation Barbarossa. Can you explain this to me? If it was such an easy to predict invasion, why did, if it was means of buying time, why did Stalin forbid the army from doing anything when the operation started?
To the military alliance myth is the claim that Stalin conspired with Hitler to partition Poland between Germany.
Yeah, because he did, and not just Poland. In fact, he also wanted to annex the Baltic states, which he did due to this pact, as a direct result of this pact, because it also clarified the spheres of influence. In fact, interestingly enough, and I'm 100% sure this is not going to be mentioned in this video, but the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact did not actually just end at the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. No, it actually did not. It was actually followed up by another treaty, and that treaty was called German-Soviet Boundary and Friendship Treaty. How interesting. There was never a German USSR pact. Not at all. It was never called the German-Soviet Boundary and Friendship Treaty. The German-Soviet Boundary and Friendship Treaty was a second supplementary protocol of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 23rd August 1939. Very interesting that Hakim is sort of, in his absent-mindedness, forgetting about this little supplement to the pact, which was a pact. It was a secret clause as amended on 28 September 1939 by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union after the joint invasion and occupation of sovereign Poland. It was signed by Joachim von Ribbentrop and Vyacheslav Molotov, the foreign ministers of Germany and the Soviet Union respectively, in the presence of Joseph Stalin. Only a small portion of the protocol, which superseded the first treaty, was publicly announced. While the spheres of influence of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union remained secret, the third secret protocol of the pact was signed on the 10th of January 1941 by Friedrich Werner von Schulenburg and Molotov, wherein Germany renounced its claims to portions of Lithuania only a few months before their anti-Soviet Operation Barbarossa. Secret articles. Several secret articles were attached to the treaty. These articles allowed for the exchange of Soviet and German nationals between the two occupied zones of Poland, redrew parts of the Central European spheres of interest dictated by the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. That's right. The initial Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact dictated spheres of interest, which also is, interestingly enough, completely omitted in the Hakim video. What do you know? And also stated that neither party to the treaty would allow on its territory any Polish agitation directed at the other party. Wow. That is so non-pact like. Damn. During the Western invasion of Poland, the German Wehrmacht had taken control of the Lublin Voivodeship and Eastern Warsaw Voivodeship territories that the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact had accorded in the Soviet sphere of influence. To compensate the Soviets for that loss, the treaty's secret attachment transferred Lithuania to the Soviet sphere of influence, except for a small territory which was referred to as Lithuania Strip, the left bank of the Sesupe River, and was to remain a German sphere of influence. Wow. Well, that is totally not a carving up of countries. Totally not. That's a myth. That's Western propaganda. Wow. I like, ooh. But that is very interesting that this little boundary and friendship treaty is never mentioned, at least so far. We're 8 minutes in, so I don't know. Maybe we'll learn about it. Maybe the whole friendship and boundary thing will be debunked by Professor Hakim here.
Germany and the USSR in one of the secret articles of the pact brought by the Germans, specifically secret article number 2. If you read through it, it's fairly clear as to what Germany's true intentions were. The most obvious happens to be in the first line of the article. In the event of a territorial and political rearrangement of the areas belonging to the Polish state. This is a rather long-winded and euphemistic way to describe an invasion. The phrasing really betrays what the Germans wanted to do and then presents them in the treaty as a pure hypothetical. Also, remember, this is a secret provision of the treaty, which only serves to further make clear that Germany was starting in Poland in what had till then been a series of easy, albeit diplomatically draining annexations via the appeasement by Western powers. After all, while the Germans made it obvious that they were bent on expansion, they still wanted to have the veneer of plausible deniability. They soon use another euphemism for invasion as well, since the existence of an independent Polish state is implied to be in
hold on.
the hands of the euphemism for
It says exactly what it says. Like, is Hakim actually dishonest? Like, is this dishonesty or is this stupidity on the display? In the event of a territorial and political rearrangement of the areas belonging to the Polish state, the spheres of influence of Germany and the USSR shall be bounded approximately by the line of the rivers Narew, Vistula, and San. So in case of a territorial and political rearrangement, we divide our spheres of influence. You get this and we get this. How is this not talking of splitting territory? I'm sorry, at this point I have to ask, is this dishonesty or stupidity? Is Hakim reading basic reading comprehension? Oh, if you read Article 2, you'll definitely see that it says nothing about splitting Poland. Well, no, it says about splitting Poland in addition to actually splitting more countries into the spheres of influence of the USSR and Germany. Congratulations. It goes further than what people say. Damn.
invasion as well, since
what does he think it says here? What does he actually think that this article says? Is he gonna say
existence of an independent Polish state is implied to be in the hands?
The question of whether the interests of both parties make desirable the maintenance of an independent Polish state and how such a state should be bounded can only be definitely determined in the course of further political developments.
Of the Signees' respective governments rather than, the Polish people themselves. Poland was unfortunately really affected by governments rather than existence of an independent Polish state is implied to be in the hands of the Signees' respective governments rather than, the Polish people themselves.
So it's talking about splitting Poland. Whether or not Poland should exist independently is between the people signing the treaty. That is a very dishonest way of actually admitting that the treaty is discussing splitting Poland. Let's hear him again.
Is implied to be in the hands of the signees' respective governments as well, since the existence of an independent Polish state is implied to be in the hands of the signees' respective governments rather than, the Polish people themselves. Poland was unfortunately really affected by anti-Semitic conspiracies in the form of Judeo-Bolshevism, the extremely stupid idea that Jewish people were overrepresented in and thereby controlled the Soviet government. This anti-communist sentiment was a powerful...
Yes, this is a real thing that existed in pre-World War II Poland, and therefore Poland's independence was in the hands of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union?
Powerful guiding force in the
What does that have to do with anything?
Foreign policy, obviously shunning the possibility
No.
of an alliance with the Ottoman was a power...
Judeo-communism was not part of a driving force in Polish foreign policy. No. That part is a... Can I see any substantiation of this?
Powerful guiding force in the Polish foreign policy. Obviously shunning the possibility of an alliance with the USSR, Poland sought to force strategic military alliances with Britain and France to guard...
Poland had a non...
against a Nazi. An alliance sentiment was a powerful guiding force in the Polish foreign policy. Obviously,
you do realize that that Poland had the same type of treaty that it had with Nazi Germany, right? A non-aggression pact. Poland absolutely had a non-aggression pact with the USSR, one that the USSR broke when it entered Poland. Are we forgetting about this, Professor Hakim? We're gonna even mention this sort of non-aggression pact? Because again, the actual existing foreign policy that Poland had was the policy of, for better or worse, equal distance from the USSR and from Germany. And that is why it sought treaties with France and England, because it sought to have equal distance from the USSR and Germany. That was a very strictly followed doctrine in Poland. To its detriment, one could say.
Shunning the possibility of an alliance with the USSR.
So no, at the very least, Poland had a non-aggression pact with the USSR.
Poland sought to force strategic military alliances with Britain and France to guard against a Nazi invasion, and signed a mutual defense pact only months before the invasion would actually occur. In this context, Stalin had to make a difficult decision about how to best allow the USSR to survive the oncoming assault, which would be called Operation Barbarossa, which began in 1941. Additionally,
by crippling his army, by executing all of his generals. But I've said this already a million times. But I guess if Hakim's not even going to mention it once, then I might as well repeat it over and over and over again. If the invasion of Nazi Germany was so obvious, was so transparently incoming, then why would you do that? Why would you cripple your military? If it was so obvious, if everything was so obvious.
the notion that Stalin was secretly planning a joint offensive with Hitler in order to partition Poland hasn't really been substantiated.
Well, it has been by your own quotes from the articles. You said it yourself that the existence of Poland as an independent state was actually in the hands of the side signing the non-aggression treaty. So between Nazi Germany and the USSR. What is it if not a plan to divide Poland between those countries? Please explain that to me, Hakim. Professor Hakim. Your own quotes substantiated that claim.
If you look at the order of events, the reaction of the Soviet leadership, and the actions of the Red Army, which we're going to talk about in a second, you clearly see that this was not the typical actions of a conquering army. Stalin's focus...
Wasn't it? It went, disarmed the Polish army, and then executed a lot of the Polish army. And then did massive deportations of people. Those are not the actions of a conquering army. The last rabbi of the Great Synagogue in Warsaw was executed by the USSR.
focus on an invasion threat from Germany and the time he was trying to buy to thwart one was only in regard to the USSR, not Poland. Of course, he only cares about his own nation. The USSR leadership was absolutely blindsided by the Nazi invasion of Poland. It occurred only one...
Blindsided? Can you substantiate that claim? Do you have any evidence that the USSR was blindsided by the Nazi invasion of Poland? What? Like, you're just saying things at this point. You're gonna substantiate any of the claims that you're making. The USSR was blindsided by the invasion.
One week after signing the pact, and only one day after the Supreme Soviet approved it. These are not the actions of a state anticipating...
I'm sorry, what?
...a joint offensive. Only one day absolutely blindsided by the Nazi invasion of Poland. It occurred only 1 week after signing the pact, and only one day after the Supreme Soviet approved it. These are not the actions of a state anticipating a joint offensive. Just to be clear...
Yeah, they delayed entering themselves. That's true, but it doesn't mean it's not supporting your point. I'm sorry.
The USSR leadership understood...
What about the execution of members of the Polish army? Cutting. The Cutting massacre.
...was planning on invading Poland, but not so immediately and so blatantly. Due to the USSR leadership understood it. These are not the actions of a state anticipating a joint offensive. Just to be clear, the USSR leadership understood Hitler was planning on invading Poland, but not so immediately and so blatantly. Due to them being caught off guard, the Soviet invasion of Poland not only happened days after the Nazi...
Oh, so the Soviet invasion did happen. Why? Why did the Soviet invasion happen instead of the Soviet support of Poland? Can you answer this one for us, Hakim?
The invasion was hastily and poorly organized. The Red Army was still devastated from World War I and the Civil War. Much of the Soviet efforts after...
The Red Army was devastated from World War I? What Red Army during World War I? What?
At the time had been focused on improving the lives of people and rebuilding the country. In fact, Polish citizens were often very surprised that the Red Army was...
Okay, I'm sorry. Am I... The Red Army was formed in 1918. The Red Army was devastated by World War I when it was formed in 1918. Like, for a second there I was like, wait, am I an idiot? Am I misremembering when the Red Army was even formed? But no! It was formed in 1918 as a voluntary army, in fact. How could it have been devastated by World War I if it didn't even exist at that point? Professor Hakim, you're slipping on your history a bit. Should I even trust anything that you say? That you can't even keep basic facts straight? I actually double-checked it. By a decree of January 28th, January 15th, Old Style, 1918, the Council of People's Commissars created a Workers' and Peasants' Red Army on a voluntary basis. 1918.
So deprived as far as
Let's
armies
hear it
go.
again.
In fact, Polish citizens, much of the Soviet efforts at the time had been focused on improving the lives of people and rebuilding from World War I and the days after them. So immediately and so blatantly. Just to be clear, the USSR leadership understood Hitler was planning on invading Poland, but not so immediately and so blatantly. Due to them being caught off guard, the Soviet invasion of Poland not only happened days after the Nazi invasion, but was hastily and poorly organized. The Red Army was still devastated from World War I and the Civil War.
The Red Army was devastated from World War I. Oh, it didn't stop it from trying to conquer Poland in the Polish Soviet War, even though it was apparently so devastated after World War One, and nearly succeeding, by the way. Yeah, the Polish-Soviet War was not a civil war.
Much of the Soviet efforts at the time had been focused on improving the lives of people and rebuilding the country. In fact, before much of the Soviet efforts at the time had been
Oh, I'm
focused on
sorry. Let's hear this one again, because that one's rich. That's even worse than the Red Army claim.
The Red Army was still devastated from World War I and the Civil War. Much of the Soviet efforts at the time had been focused on improving the lives of people and
much of the effort of the time was focused on improving the lives of people via the Great Terror of the 30s, the Holodomor. Oh yeah, those were all actions just really focused on improving the lives of people, especially the Polish NKVD operation. What was the quote? Hold on. Hold on. I seem to remember. Oh yeah, I have a quote about this. Let's see. I guess that was one of the methods of the Soviet Union to improve people's lives. Stalin expressed his delight. Very good. Keep on digging up and cleaning out this Polish filth. Eliminate it in the interests of the Soviet Union. Amazing! The Soviet Union was clearly focused on primarily improving people's lives. In the Great Terror. Damn. I guess we just have different definitions of what improving people's lives means. Huh.
and rebuilding the country. In fact,
rebuilding the country via the Great Terror again.
Citizens were often very surprised that the Red Army was so deprived, as far as armies go at the very least. Citizens mentioned that they're malnourished.
Yeah, it was deprived, considering the great purges that Stalin engineered personally. I wonder, where did all of the great generals of the Red Army go? Oh wait, they were executed. Huh.
Or poorly clothed, that they were foul-smelling because of a tar that they used in their footwear, as well as mentioned how Red Army soldiers were fascinated by objects that Polish peasants found commonplace. Again, not surprising for a nation that had just started its first round of industrialization. Aside practically all the areas the Soviets would go on to quote-unquote occupy prior to 1941 either were part of the post-Tsarist political structure or had their own episode of the Bolshevik Revolution, which happened to be defeated either by white armies, for example Finland in the Civil War, or German World War I policy, specifically Brest-Litovsk. Okay, so if the USSR didn't conspire with the Nazis to partition Poland amongst themselves, then why did the USSR invade Poland? There's plenty of...
Interesting. I'm really curious about the reasoning that I'm going to hear as to why the Soviet Union invaded Poland. I mean, I know what the reasoning is going to be. It was to save all the people. It was to save the poor Ukrainian, Belarusian, and Lithuanian people.
Sources that already focus and almost exclusively mention the many unjustifiable mistakes committed by the Red Army, as with any army, of course. But this...
Yeah, Katyn was just a mistake. The Katyn massacre was just an oopsie committed by the Red Army. It was a mistake. Let's get a refresher. Damn, so many mistakes were made. So many unfortunate mistakes were made by the Red Army. The Katyn massacre was a series of mass executions of nearly 22,000 Polish military officers and intelligentsia prisoners of war carried out by the Soviet Union, specifically the NKVD, People's Commissariat of Internal Affairs, the Soviet secret police, in April and May 1940. Though the killings also occurred in the Kalinin and Kharkiv prisons and elsewhere, the massacre is named after the Katyn forest, where some of the mass graves were first discovered by German Nazi forces. The order to execute captive members of the Polish officer corps was secretly issued by the Soviet Politburo led by Joseph Stalin. Of the total killed, about 8,000 were officers imprisoned during the 1939 Soviet invasion of Poland. Another 6,000 were police officers, and the remaining 8,000 were Polish intelligentsia, the Soviets deemed to be intelligence agents and gendarmes, spies, and saboteurs, former landowners, factory owners, and officials. The Polish army officer class was representative of the multi-ethnic Polish state. The murdered, including ethnic Poles, Ukrainians, Belarusians, and 700 to 900 Polish Jews. Interesting how that goes. I guess the last rabbi of the great synagogue in Warsaw was simply a spy and had to be dealt with, which I guess can be just chalked up to a Red Army mistake, an oopsie. Again, it was just an oopsie. Let's forget about it. Mistakes were made.
Overemphasis really only serves as a way for liberals to equate the communists and Nazis, which is
true. It's all about that horseshoe theory, which nobody ever uses as an argument, apart from you in this video.
an ideological pool with the depth of a puddle. Let's take a look into the nuance. The USSR leadership's
nuance. Okay, let's hear the nuance.
Original justification given for the invasion of Poland was to regain lands lost in the Treaty of Riga, which concluded in 1919 and 1921 Polish Bolshevik War. Ukraine and Belarus, then a part of the USSR, were invaded by Poland in their attempt to re-establish the borders of the Polish Empire of 1772. USSR were invaded.
Oh, Polish Empire! Is this what we were calling the union between the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which was a composite state? Is that what we're calling it? An empire? Can you substantiate that claim of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth being an empire? Hold on. I have a very interesting quote for that one as well. Because, I guess... Very interesting. Okay. I actually love this quote, so I'm gonna read it in full, because it seems that we are dealing with the illiterate. The history of Eastern European is dominated. The history of Eastern European is dominated by the story of the rise of the Russian Empire. Yet Russia only emerged as a major power in the 1700s. For 300 years, the greatest power in Eastern Europe was the union between the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, one of the longest lasting political unions in European history. Yet, because it ended in the late 18th century in what are misleadingly termed the partitions of Poland, it barely features in standard accounts of European history. The making of the Polish-Lithuanian Union 1385-1569 tells the story of the formation of a consensual, decentralized, multinational, and religiously plural state built from below as much as above, that was founded by peaceful negotiation, not war and conquest. From its inception in 1385-56, a vision of political union was developed that proved attractive to Poles, Lithuanians, Ruthenians, and Germans, a union which was extended to include Prussia in the 1450s and Livonia in 1560s. Despite the often bitter disagreements over the nature of the union, these were nevertheless overcome by a republican vision of a union of peoples in one political community of citizens under an elected monarch. Robert Frost challenges interpretations of the union informed by the idea that the emergence of the sovereign nation state represents the essence of political modernity and presents the Polish-Lithuanian Union as a case study of a composite state. The modern history of Poland, Lithuania, Ukraine, and Belarus cannot be understood without an understanding of the legacy of the Polish-Lithuanian Union. Oh wow! Well, that just sounds like an empire in the 1700s, doesn't it? Well, that just sounds like you know, I love it.
By Poland in their attempt to 1921 Polish-Bolshevik War, regain lands lost in the Treaty of Riga, which concluded the 1919 and 1921 Polish-Bolshevik War. Ukraine and Belarus, then a part of the USSR, were invaded by Poland in their attempt to re-establish the borders of...
By the way, are we gonna ignore the Polish-Ukrainian War and how Ukraine, the Ukraine People's Republic allied itself with Poland to fight against the USSR? Are we just going to ignore all that? Of course we're gonna ignore that because that makes it a little bit inconvenient. That makes it a little bit inconvenient, doesn't it?
...of the Polish Empire of 1772.
The Polish Empire of 1772. Especially to call the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth an empire in 1772, when it basically was a puppet state of Russia at that point. 1772, the date of the first partition. That's when you're gonna call it an empire.
In the treaty, the Polish border was established by Britain and the US at 200 miles east of the Curzon line. However, due to the march of time and the migrations of people that occurred during previous eras, the lands acquired by Poland were no longer ethnically Polish, but were mainly Ukrainian and Belarusian. Therefore, Poland was seen as an occupier colonial power even in these regions.
That is only partially true. For example, the whole example of Lviv being primarily a Polish city and all the outskirts being primarily Ukrainian. So definitely it was a lot more complicated than that. Also, it was not due to the movement of peoples. Like, you have no idea what you're talking about. The Lithuanian people, which later became Ukrainian and Belarusian, lived there for a long time. What movement of people? Can you get into that? What movement of people? What's happening here?
Regions by or mainly Ukrainian and during previous eras, the lands acquired by Poland were no longer ethnically Polish, but were mainly Ukrainian and Belarusian. Therefore, Poland was seen as an occupier colonial power even in these regions.
So yes, there is partial truth to this claim, but it's not totally true.
By minority groups. The motivations to invade Poland expressed by the Red Army, however, were quite different. They claimed they were compelled to counter the invasion by Germany and liberate the Polish proletariat and oppress...
Oh! By executing the intelligentsia and the officers of the Polish army in the Katyn massacre. That's the liberation. Excellent. I love it when people are liberated via execution. And I especially love it when people are liberated from their homes via deportation, which happened to Vilnius, which happened to Lviv. I really love it when people are liberated via execution and, expulsion. That's my favorite type of liberation.
Oppressed minorities. Now, of course, this may sound kind of two-faced, but they did genuinely believe this stuff, and the...
Yeah, that's why they executed Polish people and deported them. It's because they genuinely believe this stuff. Can I have any? Um can you provide anything in support of your claim? Again, there's a sentence that I keep saying a lot throughout this video. Can you provide anything to support any of your claims? Anything at all? Anything. Throw me a bone. You cannot spell intelligentsia without the CIA. Ah, yes, of course. Of course, of course, of course. The Katyn massacre famously happened because the USSR was just trying to counter the evil ploys of the forever lasting emperor of the CIA, William Burns. That's exactly what happened. That is precisely what happened. In fact, the USSR through the Katyn massacre was simply thwarting a CIA coup. That's actually that's a very good theory. I'll write it down in my notebook.
The work of Kotkin goes as far as to prove as much. The Red Army used slogans of class emancipation with national liberation, which caused confusion amongst the various minorities who had their own interests and scores to settle with Poland. While the Soviets intended to rescue Belarusians and Ukrainians from mostly Polish class domination, each group found support for their own particular ethnic claims and or projects, of course.
Yeah, because historically the Soviet Union has been so good at protecting the interests of Ukrainians via the Holodomor and other interesting things like the Great Purge. Okay, that's great. That's just amazing. And what else? What else? What else? Oh yeah, we're totally gonna ignore again the fact that the Ukraine People's Republic had a military alliance with Poland against the USSR in the Polish-Soviet War. But that's who cares? Who cares about historical accuracy? Historical accuracy is just for schmucks, for dupes.
Red Army soldiers entering Poland, tasked with preparing local populations ideologically for the invasions, shouted slogans which explicitly encouraged the population to, and I quote, rectify the wrongs it had suffered during 20 years of Polish rule, and disseminated very base leaflets, actually, that urged Polish soldiers to turn their weapons against the capitalists, the landowners, and the military officials, which similarly encouraged the local population to...
Let's forget about the fact that during the height of the famine, Ukrainian refugees basically begged Poland to invade. But okay.
Assaulted their landlords with, quote, whatever was at hand, scythes, axes, and pitchforks. Anyways, as a result of this propaganda effort, much of the initial brutality that occurred in what would become Soviet-occupied Poland, or...
Initial brutality? That's interesting, considering that the Katyn massacre actually occurred in 1940. So it was not an initial burst of violence.
To the Ukraine.
But hey, let's forget about that one, right?
The maps get fuzzy after a while, began prior to the beginning of the invasion proper. It should also be noted that most of it was selective, targeting only those of the then perceived as oppressor classes, such as landlords. This is important to mention given that so much attention is given to later mistakes, and this period gets unfairly lumped in.
Oh, later mistakes? Is the Katyn massacre gonna be listed as one of those quote-unquote mistakes? Oh, a little bit of a massacre.
In by liberals, since they see mega landlords getting a comeuppance and their land expropriated as a bad thing. I don't, clearly.
Clearly.
Anyways, the Red Army wasn't only handing leaflets out.
Oh no, we're not even gonna mention the Katyn massacre. Okay. Sure, we can also go that route. We can.
They're also given substantial spending money. This was further facilitated by the ruble being declared legal tender in the occupied area on parity with the Polish currency. Exact figures are hard to pin down.
Actually, Poland and Lithuania were an empire, caused a big country. And of course, I'm not going to go too much into this because that's also very much ignored by many people discussing history, which for the first time I've heard this from a Ukrainian historian, that the Ruthenian nobility, so basically which were the territories of Ukraine. The Ukrainian historian was primarily concerned with the territories that make up modern day Ukraine. The Ruthenian nobility during the formation of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth did not sort of took a very passive role in the formation of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, and there was a very big opportunity of the formation of the Polish-Lithuanian Ruthenian Commonwealth if the Ruthenian nobility took a far less passive role in the formation of the union itself, which would have created a very different political situation, because instead of two separate but united political entities, you would have three, which would have very much changed the political situation of the union. And it is very much fair to say that history would have went far different than it did. But that's a whole different story.
Down, but locals were shocked by the sheer amount of goods the Red Army soldiers were buying, and maybe even more surprising, doing so without haggling prices. As the Red Army advanced through Poland, a significant power vacuum pushed swiftly ahead of it.
What happened to the Polish army? What happened to the Polish army when the Soviet Union entered? What happened to it?
This created an immediate demand for auxiliary measures to maintain some kind of order. This led to the formation of something called the Citizens' Guard, a voluntary assembly of mostly quote-unquote patriotic, rightist citizens in various municipalities, mostly local people, minor officials, that kind of stuff. And their primary function was to aid the dwindling local governments, who had by then mostly disbanded, in order to ensure the safety of the remaining population, just to maintain order, basically. Unsurprisingly.
Oh yeah. Also the massacres and the executions of the Polish intelligentsia was also all in the spirit of just keeping peace. It's true. It's just, it's a common practice, basically. It's just a courtesy. You could just call it a cleanup operation.
The Citizens' Guard was legitimized by its connection with the prior right-wing regime, which influenced its ethnic and class structure, unsurprisingly.
Oh, prior right-wing regime, huh? Okay, Hakim. Okay, Professor Hakim. What was exactly the parliament breakdown of the Polish government before World War II? Let's hear it. What was the breakdown of the Polish government in 1939 as the invasion, as Fall Weiss was happening?
The widespread anti-communist sentiment of Poland, many towns and villages turned out in large numbers to greet and welcome the Red Army. Not all were spontaneous, nor did all have local organizational impetus. Prior to the invasion, the USSR sent people ahead of the Red Army to organize receptions for incoming troops. The local residents, especially those belonging to the Polish and Belarusian ethnic minority groups, seemed to be prepared for the Soviet invasion, and although some were enthusiastic about their arrival, others needed to be persuaded or coerced even into organizing.
Persuaded? I wonder.
Welcoming.
In fact, some tens or even hundreds of thousands of people had to be deported, but it's all in the name of peace.
A crucial factor contributing to the positive atmosphere surrounding the Soviet troops' entry was their general perception that their presence prevented the arrival of Nazi forces, or in some places, even expelling them by force. These were compelling reasons to greet the Red Army as some sort of liberator, unsurprisingly. You have to remember that along with the massive anti-Semitism within Poland, there was also at a time a fairly large radical left movement that was all but crushed and dispersed by the far right-wing government.
That is interesting because the Polish Socialist Party was basically done away with by the Soviet Union. A lot of Polish socialists were basically done away with by the Soviet Union. But that's who cares about details such as this? Who cares that many socialists and communism actually sided with Poland in the Polish Bolshevik War? But that's just who cares? That's inconvenient. Who cares about that? So we cannot forget the Belis affair when the Soviet Union spread blood libel. That's who cares.
Anyways, the celebrations, whether organic or not, were very amicable, predominantly comprising young individuals from ethnic minorities such as Belarusians, Jews, and some Ukrainians. They included the construction of triumphal arches, the raising of red banners, showering troops with flowers, hugging and kissing them, the usual stuff. Soviet invasion plans emphasized the importance of a proper and cordial reception because they saw it as a precursor for a plebiscite that would bring forth the political will of the local populace.
Oh, interesting. What happened to Lviv, which was a majority Polish city? What's happened to Vilnius? What happens to the citizens? Can you do a lecture on that, Professor Hakim? What happened to all those people? And again, was the last rabbi of the great synagogue of Warsaw, what was he executed for? Was it because he was a spy? Was it because he was some sort of rabid anti-communist? What happened there?
All the celebration, much of the older generation was still terrified, though. Some even went into hiding from the Red Army or worse. However, since the Red Army's approach, characterized by restraint and selective action rather
restrained and selective actions through execution
than indiscriminate violence, they managed to garner a measure of relief among the general population, specifically against the groups that were...
Of course, I'm not gonna get any, just, it's just gonna be you saying things without providing anything. It's just nice and dandy.
Usually targeted, which include officers, policemen, landowners, etc. What's more is that Red Army soldiers, despite commands to the contrary,
hold on,
usually did engage officers, police, the general population, specifically against the groups that managed to garner a measure of relief among the general population, specifically against the groups that were usually targeted, which include officers, policemen, landowners, etc.
Landowners, etc., until the intelligentsia, the evil intelligentsia, or the evil rabbis, which is interesting because anti-Semitism was used as an argument throughout this video. And yet, the last rabbi of the Great Synagogue in Warsaw was executed by the Soviet Union? Moses Shor, a name that you might want to look up. You should Google Moses Shor, Hakim. You might learn something interesting. In fact, let's do it. Let's Google Moses Shor. Why not? Let's see, Moses Shor. Well, what can we learn about this fascinating historical figure? What can we learn? Moses Shor was a rabbi, Polish historian, politician, Bible scholar, Assyriologist, and Orientalist. Shor was one of the top experts on the history of the Jews in Poland. Let's see. Lecturing in Lviv. Okay. Professor at the Lviv University. Professor in Semitic languages. Institute of Judaic Sciences in Warsaw. Oh, wait, hold on, what's this? Arrest by the NKVD. The appearance of Shor was quickly noted by Soviet securities in town. 2 days after his arrival, Shor was arrested by Ostrog NKVD, Soviet secret police branch, and was kept in custody in the local prison for a week. Later, he was transferred to the nearby regional administrative center of Łódź, where he spent another week in prison. Interesting. Confinement and questioning. On the 24th of September, he transferred to Lviv, where he had lived until 1923. In confinement, Shor was forced to fill in a questionnaire, was photographed, and had his personal belongings taken. His golden watch, pen, scissors, organizer, a file of photos. The scholar was asked when, by whom and why was he appointed for the senator's position. When did he become a rabbi, and to which party did he belong? Shor answered that President Mościcki appointed him to the Polish Senate in the capacity of Rabbi of Warsaw, and that he did not belong to any political party. The prosecutor noted down only his words concerning his rabbinical functions, and an account of the marriage of Shor's daughter, Sofia, residing in Paris, with an official of the Polish Ministry of Justice. Shor's wife and daughter Felicia moved to Lviv, where Felicia worked as a waitress. Imprisonment at Lubyanka. How interesting. On February 3rd, the newly appointed Russian prosecutor of the Lviv branch of the NKVD, Lepunov, received an order from the deputy of the People's Committee of the Ministry of First State Security, VN Merkulov, to send him to Moscow for a continuation of the investigation. Shor was sent in convoy to the first special department of the Soviet NKVD. In the accompanying documentation, he was noted to be healthy. In Moscow, he was held in Lubyanka prison in the same cell with the Bund activist Viktor Alter. Oh, wait, that's interesting. The Bund, you know, the General Jewish Labor Bund in Lithuania, Poland, and Russia, generally called the Bund or the Jewish Labor Bund, was a secular Jewish socialist party which was utterly destroyed in the Soviet Union. But I guess we're not gonna learn that from Hakim, because all socialists, as we know, totally supported the Soviet Union. And yet, that is so strange. There was a Bund activist, Viktor Alter, in the same cell with Moses Shor? How can that be? The Bundists were the socialists. Huh. That's curious. That's so curious. The poet Władysław Broniewski and the Polish senator of the National Party, Professor Stanisław Głąbiński. The Polish nationalist leader recollected that became such close friends that they slept together on one bench. In the accounts of cell inmate Mrs. Wisha Wagner from 10th August 1943 read, and then there's like the rabbi description. Of course, there were many attempts. The attempts to liberate Shor, which were undertaken by the Polish government in exile with the mediation of the Vatican and the United States Department of State, did not succeed. In February 1940, Cordell Hull, as Secretary of the State during the President of Franklin D. Roosevelt, appealed to the Soviet powers through the mediation of international organizations to find Shor and rescue him from the Soviet prisons. This did not produce any results. The president of the Council of Ministers of the Polish government in exile, Władysław Sikorski, applied to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of his government with the following letter. I ask you, Sir Minister, about the entreatment of our ambassador in the Vatican with the intervention aimed to free Professor Shor, arrested by the Bolshevik powers in Lviv. Interestingly enough, Poland was so utterly anti-Semitic, and yet the so not anti-Semitic Soviet Union saw it fit to imprison Professor Shor. It's interesting. I consider the diplomatic means through Vatican to the most advisable solution of this matter. After release, I ask you to direct Professor Shor to France, head of the Council of Ministers. Concentration camp and death. Oh! On 17th April 1941, Shor was assigned to 5 years of mandatory prison labor. He was taken to the NKVD's 5th concentration camp in Poste, Uzbekistan, where he fell ill and died in a camp hospital on 8th July 1941. He was buried in grave number C30 on the grounds of the hospital. Polish authorities learned of his death only on the eve of 1942, after diplomatic relations were established between the Polish London government and the Soviet government. The Polish government had been trying to liberate him a second time, planning to appoint him to the post of the main rabbi of the Anders army, which was forming at the time, but it was too late. At every ship arriving in America from Europe, nearly every Polish Jew claims to be the leader of the Jews of Poland. These are the people whose names I never heard, despite the fact that I was born and brought up in Poland. In the meantime, Professor Shor, a real authority of Polish Jewry, is kept in Bolshevik prisons, and no one makes the slightest effort to rescue him. How interesting. Oh. Huh. Damn. It was all cool. It was all chill. It was a mistake. Professor Hakim would tell us that it was just a mistake. It was a silly mistake, it happens. Whoopsies happen all the time in history. And that was one of those whoopsies, those little whoops moments.
What's more is that Red Army soldiers, despite commands to the contrary, usually did engage with locals and establish some sort of cordial relationships. After the Red Army established control over the areas they occupied, they embarked on local governance, of course to maintain order, but also to help channel it towards the provisioning of the Red Army, arresting reactionary societal figures.
Oh, so all of the Polish intelligentsia were those reactionary elements. And since those reactionary elements simply could not be contained, I guess they all had to be executed. Thank you, Professor Hakim. Good to know. Good to be educated at last. Good to be fed. I'm free from the propaganda of Polish historians at last.
Preparing the elections that were upcoming. For the next 20 months, the region that the Soviets occupied experienced a heavy dose of electoral politics. There were 3 different elections, 2 of which were within the first 6 months of the occupation. The United States didn't bother to do that with half the places they occupy, and their explicit goal is apparently democracy. Anyways.
Yes, the famous democracy brought by the Soviet Union. Just like after World War II, when the Polish People's Republic formed and had its taste of democracy. Yeah.
I have,
of course,
relevant reading recommendations that you can check out here if you're interested in how the USSR worked and all that. Anyone who has a proper understanding of how the Soviet system worked is surprised by how the Soviets operated during the occupation as it relates to civil engagement and participation. Now, it should be clear as to why Western sources demonized the USSR and tried to put the Red Army in its conduct on par with the Nazis.
Are we gonna mention the Katyn massacre as a footnote? Are you even gonna attempt to debunk it, or are you even gonna mention all the deportations, how Lviv from a majority Polish city became an almost no Polish people city? Same with Vilnius.
The USSR stayed mostly true to their principles during the occupation of Poland. It should also be clear just how nonsensical the claim about the Soviets and Nazis conspiring to partition Poland is. Rather, the Soviet occupation of Poland could be...
Yeah, so nonsensical. Once again, what was that pact called? Hold on. Oh yeah, the German-Soviet Boundary and Friendship Treaty. I almost forgot about that one. Yeah. Ridiculous Western propaganda.
Could be seen as the Soviets' attempts to save as much of the Polish population from the violence of the Wehrmacht. Unsurprisingly,
yeah, that's why 20,000 of them were killed and thousands upon thousands were deported. It's all in an attempt to save their lives.
There are several reasons, and not all, which were altruistic. Despite that, the Red Army and the Soviets were generally preferred to that of the Wehrmacht and the Nazis, except for a select segment of anti-Semitic Polish people and Ukrainians of Poland who preferred the Nazis because Judeo-Bolsheviks and all that. Regardless, they were greeted warmly by the...
Can you substantiate any of this?
Population, and even though not all were locally organized by enthusiastic supporters, the conduct of the local populace seems to indicate that most people saw them at a minimum as the lesser of 2 evils.
Oh! That's great. It's such a great title to hold. The lesser of great evils. That's what a compliment. What a compliment to receive. You're the lesser of 2 evils.
Make everything they did right, but historical nuance is a interesting and fun thing to discuss.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. So nuanced this video is. I'm impressed and educated for most of all. This video has educated me.
I look forward to random 14-year-olds complaining in the comments because I didn't say Stalin ate Polish babies. And a final addendum, this one will just be a bit rambly. For the love of God,
Hey, let's go. Let's go for the final addendum.
please don't misunderstand me. The Soviets made many, many mistakes in this.
Exactly, yeah. Like the imprisonment of Professor Shore, the Katyn massacre, the deportations from the cities that were occupied. Well, all these were simple mistakes. Who of us have not made mistakes in their life?
It would have been better that there be no pact. It would be better for them to have not occupied Poland. But if you were in the particular place and the particular industrialization level facing the same...
It would have been better for the Soviet Union to not have crippled its own military in the 30s. That is also a little bit of a factor to this nuanced video.
Kind of danger. I don't know if you would have made better decisions particularly, especially when there was goodwill shown in the form of collective security with France and Britain, which would have prevented all this nonsense to begin with, or at least...
Why was it rejected? Can you... Oh, no, you're not gonna get into this. Okay.
Greatly affected it. That's all for this time. If you enjoyed
That was such a great video.
what I do, then please consider supporting me on Patreon. It really does help. I'd like to thank my patrons, so thank you to Nitro Dubs, Kenny, Thomas Roberts, Nicholas, Owen Baker, T. Wood, Dr. Lemonman.
Okay, that's enough.